2,000 years ago, a military organization marched out of central Italy and spent the next 5 centuries building the largest empire the Western world has ever seen. They did it without satellites, without firearms, without any of the technological infrastructure that modern military forces consider the minimum requirement for sustained operations. They did it with sandals, iron, discipline, and a system of military organization so effective that modern armies are still borrowing from it. Today, the United States Marine Corps is considered one of the most formidable fighting forces on Earth. 13 weeks of boot camp that breaks down and rebuilds a civilian mind. Weapons systems that project lethal force across distances a Roman soldier couldn't have imagined. Tactical doctrine refined through decades of modern combat experience across every terrain type on the planet. Here's the question that military historians keep returning to and never quite settle. When you strip away the technology, put both forces on the same ground, and measure what was actually built inside the man, the discipline, the unit cohesion, the psychological architecture that held together when everything fell apart, how does the most powerful military force in modern history compare to the one that held the Western world together for 500 years? The answer contains something that every military commander since Rome has been trying to rebuild, and most of them have only gotten partway there. Rome didn't invent the professional soldier, but Rome perfected him in a way that changed what armies were capable of permanently. The Roman legionary wasn't recruited from a warrior class or a noble tradition. He was recruited from the general population, farmers, craftsmen, the sons of ordinary families across the Italian peninsula, and eventually across the entire empire. What the Roman military system did with that ordinary raw material is what makes it one of the most studied military institutions in human history. It took a man with no particular martial background and, through a training and organizational system of extraordinary sophistication, turned him into a component of a military machine that functioned with a collective precision that individual warrior cultures couldn't match and often couldn't explain. Training in the Roman legions began immediately upon enlistment and never fully stopped. New recruits trained for 4 months before being considered minimally functional. Physical conditioning included a daily march of 20 Roman miles, roughly 18 modern miles, in full kit weighing between 40 and 60 pounds, conducted at a pace that legionaries called the military step, roughly 3 miles per hour, maintained across terrain that didn't pause for difficult ground. This wasn't the upper limit of what legionaries were expected to do. It was the baseline, the standard below which a soldier was considered undertrained. Weapon training was conducted against wooden posts called pali, using wooden swords and wicker shields weighted to double the combat load of the real equipment. The Roman military theory behind this was explicit and recorded. If a soldier trained with equipment heavier than combat weight, the real weapons would feel light when the fighting started. The training load was the point. The discomfort of preparation was the preparation. But here's what separated Roman military conditioning from almost every other ancient system. And this is the part that modern military doctrine keeps returning to in different language. The Romans understood that individual physical capability was not the primary variable in large-scale battle outcomes. Unit cohesion was. The ability of men to maintain formation, execute coordinated tactical movements, and function as a collective organism under the psychological pressure of close-range combat. That was the capability the Roman system was specifically engineered to produce. Individual bravery was considered secondary and sometimes actively discouraged when it broke the line. The man who charged ahead alone, however physically capable, was a problem. The man who held his position in the formation and trusted the man beside him. That was the product the system was building. The Legionaries' tactical unit, the contubernium of 8 men, ate together, slept together in the same tent, marched together and fought together across a service commitment that ran 25 years. The psychological bond that produced wasn't manufactured through team-building exercises. It was built through 2.5 decades of shared hardship. The same cold, the same mud, the same weight on the same roads, the same enemy across the same line. By the time a Roman legionary reached mid-career, his unit cohesion wasn't a trained response. It was the deepest social relationship of his adult life. Now walk into the recruit training depot at Parris Island, South Carolina, and feel the temperature of what the modern Marine Corps is attempting. 13 weeks. That's the standard timeline for transforming a civilian into a United States Marine. In those 13 weeks, a recruit is systematically stripped of civilian identity and rebuilt around a Marine identity so deliberately and completely that the psychological transformation has been studied by organizational psychologists as one of the most effective identity reconstruction programs ever designed outside of a religious institution. The physical demands are genuine. Long runs, obstacle courses, combat fitness tests, water survival training, rifle qualification standards that require genuine marksmanship competence rather than just familiarity with the weapon. The mental demands are equally real: sleep restriction, constant performance evaluation, deliberate stress loading to find and expose the psychological ceiling of each recruit before a real battlefield does it instead. What Marine Corps boot camp produces in 13 weeks is something the Roman system took years to develop. A baseline functional warrior with a unit identity, a discipline framework, and enough technical competence to be immediately useful in a modern combat environment. The efficiency is extraordinary. It is also, in the most honest assessment, a compression of what the Roman system spread across decades, and compression always costs something. The Roman legionary at year 10 of his service had an accumulated physical and psychological adaptation that 13 weeks of intense training cannot replicate in structural depth. His body had been conditioned by a decade of daily loaded marching, daily weapon training, multiple campaign seasons of actual operational stress. His nervous system had processed years of the specific stimulus that builds the specific adaptation. His unit cohesion was real in a way that 13 weeks of shared hardship, however intense, doesn't fully match. The modern Marine builds a foundation rapidly and builds it well. The Roman legionary built the same foundation and slowly, and what slow building produces in the biology is fundamentally different from what rapid compression produces. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting, and this is the hook that most comparisons miss entirely. The Roman military system wasn't just a training program, it was a complete life structure. A legionary didn't go home after training and resume civilian existence. He lived inside the military system continuously for 25 years, on multiple continents, under conditions of sustained operational stress that modern service members experience in deployment rotations, but not as a permanent baseline. The adaptation that produced, in the cardiovascular system, in the connective tissue, in the nervous system's stress response calibration, was the product of a life lived entirely inside demanding conditions, rather than a training cycle that returns to comfort between rotations. In weapons and tactical method, the comparison splits into two entirely separate domains that barely overlap. A United States Marine operates in a completely different physics of violence. The M16 or M4 rifle engages targets accurately at distances where the Roman tactical system never even begins. Modern combined arms warfare, infantry coordinated with air support, artillery, armored vehicles, and real-time intelligence operates at a scale and complexity that no ancient military system was designed to address. The Marine is a component of a system that projects force across distances and through means that make the Roman battlefield almost unrecognizable by comparison. In a direct confrontation, stripped of modern weapons, on terrain that forces engagement inside the range where Roman tactical advantages apply, the Legionaries' formation discipline, his shield system, his specific conditioning for this exact type of grinding, close-range combat gives him serious structural advantages that modern infantry training doesn't develop. The Marine is trained for a different battlefield. Moved to the Roman one, he is operating outside his training's domain. With modern weapons, the equation inverts instantly and completely. The engagement ends at a distance where Roman tactical doctrine never gets a chance to apply. So what is the honest verdict when you commit to it fully? The United States Marine Corps produces technically superior, more versatile, more cognitively capable warriors, faster than any military system in human history. The technology, the tactical doctrine, the weapons systems, and the organizational infrastructure it operates within are categorically beyond anything Rome achieved. On the modern battlefield, there is no comparison. But the Roman legion understood something about military organization that the modern world keeps having to relearn. That the strongest unit isn't built from the strongest individuals. It's built from the deepest bonds between ordinary ones. The 25 years of shared hardship produces something in human beings that 13 weeks of intense training, however well designed, produces an approximation of, but not the full thing. That the man who has been cold and hungry and exhausted beside the same men for a decade carries a different weight into combat than the man who has been those things beside different people for a few months. The Marine Corps knows this. It's why they spend 13 weeks destroying civilian identity and rebuilding a Marine one so completely. It's why they invest in unit cohesion the way they do. It's why the institutional culture of the Corps reaches back 2.5 centuries and treats that history as a living part of every Marine's identity. They learned it from somewhere, and the somewhere is a military system that marched in sandals across most of the known world and held it together for 500 years through nothing but discipline, unit cohesion, and an organizational genius that the modern world is still studying. The empire fell. The lesson didn't.